The Progetto 46, a tank that many of you will have come up against within World of Tanks, and one that is definitely one of the most powerful tier 8 mediums. And today we are checking out two fantastic replays played by Micah here in the first one. Now then, Redshire is a particularly great map for the Progetto because it offers the ability to use the flexibility of the tank, and also it enables you to just get some damage out across using bush mechanics, all of the spotting mechanics that are in World of Tanks, and it also means that you can relocate, because often in a lot of the town maps you don't have that ability, and so yeah, it can be a little bit difficult. And you can see at the beginning of the game Micah takes a little bit of an aggressive approach, and he just does that in order to basically spot the opponents, be able to understand where they're going to be going, and then hopefully himself be able to get some damage out. Of course, this is a 3-shot auto reloading medium tank that has 240 damage per shot. Now Micah relocates into a position that I'm sure many of you will have known about on Redshire, which is of course to spot for his team and be able to secure a more defensive role at the beginning of this game, since the enemy team seem to have pushed very aggressively into the town area over here on the minimap, and also they've got the Type 62 and the Leo that are pushing a little bit aggressively as well. So he has to be careful of all four of those tanks, and potentially any more tanks that maybe haven't yet been spotted, so he can kind of push this flank, win this, and then deal with the ambush of all of the heavy tanks on the other side of the map. Now then, having been pushed from that position, he is now taking a more defensive position, and you can see the VKD here made the ultimate mistake of actually getting spotted, and of course getting tracked by the auto reloading medium tank. And Micah there absolutely loves that scenario where he can dish out all 3 shots of damage in such a short period of time that it makes it so much fun to be able to rack up damage. Now in this scenario, Micah must be knowing that he has to deal with this flank quickly, or he has to do something, otherwise the enemy team, they're going to be pushing through this area. Looks like they've got an overwhelming force in this poor middle right hand corner of the map, and then they're going to be pushing up to the top right, and then they're going to be able to kind of sausage sandwich. So he needs to at least create an opening on this left hand side so he can dish out his damage and then turn around and deal with whatever's left of the enemy team that have progressed. Now this VKD is being a real pain for Micah here, and you can see what he's trying to do is just get some shots onto him and then take him out so he doesn't continuously get spotted, because that's the problem at the moment with that VKD. It's not necessarily the firepower of the tank, but also it just doesn't allow Micah to be really flexible with what he wants to play within this game. And he also notes that the CS52, he needs to go, because once he's out the game it's not really going to be a big problem. And you can see the CS is, well, definitely not situationally aware of what's going on as Micah shuts him down with just 2 shots, and that is where the Progetto becomes like the ultimate destroyer of all of the tanks in the game, because when you've got 720 total damage that you can dish out in one singular clip, that is what makes this tank so dangerous, and why when players like Micah get their hands on it, it can be devastating for all in the game, whether that's your team because you're just dishing out that much damage and stealing their damage, or for the enemy team of course because you are just being the one that's dealing so much damage. And with 2,700 in this game, it seems like a very slow start, but this racks up to an insane degree as we go through, and I'm sure you'll see this. Now the P43 is of course in a very bad situation. Seems like he's getting his arse tickled by a lot of different people, and of course Micah here is the one that's tickling his bum the best, dishing out all 3 shots into the back of him. And now Micah's in the scenario where he needs to go forward, get rid of this Borsig, and then he can potentially turn around. He has to be very careful that the opponents don't actually manage to do too much. He obviously sees that the Comet maybe judded him into the back of him, which was a little bit annoying, and I guess that's why he reversed back up into him, but he's going to take the aggressive approach now. With the aggression on hand, he's now going towards this Borsig. Where is he? finds the side of his turret, puts one round into him, manages to connect the second round into him, and now it's time to defend the base. So at least that's what I would assume Micah is thinking at this point, because it's so easy when opponents on the right hand side decide to push aggressively, because there's only two options that they have. They can either sit here and trade 1-for-1 with your team that are going to be sat on this hill area, and also the 2 artillery that are going to be bombing into them, and that's kind of the areas at which they can really make an approach from that right hand side if they continue. However, what you do have the opportunity to do on this side is actually come round back and take a pincer maneuver where they can go round. But in the meantime, the Progetto 46 on the enemy team gets spotted, and unfortunately for him, he doesn't have the accuracy that Micah has to be able to connect all 3 shots, and he only manages to hit 1, and that means that Micah takes him swiftly out of the game and out of the action, which means that there is only a couple tanks on the enemy team left that could pose a real threat. We have the Skoda T56. We've got, of course, the J Panther, which can be a bit devastating, actually, when it gets set up and if it can pump out that damage, because the DPM on that tank isn't awful, albeit, you know, you can take it out pretty easily with a couple of shots. It's just about that damage that it can dish out to you. And in this scenario, with 4,500 damage done, it is a very, very good game for anyone really playing a tier 8. You know, you'd be very, very happy, and there's nothing more happy than taking out that horrible Czech heavy at tier 8, the Skoda T56 in one shot, and then removing the next T34-3 out of the game as well. So this is what the auto-reloading tanks can do. It just gives you that ultimate flexibility that allows you as a player within this game to be the ultimate flexible tank that pretty much no one really has much that they can do against you if it's in the right hands, and if you decide to play to the scenario as opposed to just playing the map. Because, you know, many players in World of Tanks typically just play the map, like, oh, it's Redshire, I'm going over here, and therefore, you know, they kind of get caught up in this scenario where you push a flank because you think that it's going to be right, even though maybe only one teammate is actually going to support you. Then you end up complaining because no one supported you, knowing full well that they wouldn't. And so, yeah, that it can be very difficult to deal with. But Micah doesn't have that problem. He knows, he's played enough World of Tanks to know when to push and when to be aggressive. And it feels almost bad when you're coming up against players like the J Panther that just didn't quite realise the power of the Progetto, and yeah, they get taken out very easily for that. And now Micah makes the aggressive push towards the almost full health Super Pershing, and also the GW Panther, who is probably the tank that everybody wants to take out in the game. Of course, if he can do that, then that will be the best. Now he puts 1 round into the Super Pershing, knowing full well that he's not able to take out all of the remaining hit points in one go, which is exactly what you should do in the auto reloaders. Puts 1 round into the GW Panther, securing the 11th kill of the game, and now it's time to take out the final remaining hit points of the Super Pershing. Can he do it? Connects one into the tracks of the Super Pershing, waits for the reload, knows full well that he can now dish out all of the damage, and that is exactly what he does. A ridiculous replay, to be honest with you, in the Progetto, and showcasing exactly what this tank can do in this sort of scenario. And we have one other replay that I want to showcase to you guys. Now then, the next replay we have in the Progetto is played by Weekend Dak, who is an amazing player, and he is going to showcase how amazing the Progetto once again can be on various different maps. And this map in particular is Live Oaks, and this is the final replay that we're showcasing today. Now he makes a beeline for the position that pretty much is pinnacle to this side, which is the dip on Live Oaks, and that is something that a lot of players don't necessarily have the ability to do in slower mediums that maybe just don't have the speed that the Progetto does. Of course, the Progetto can go up to 65 kilometers an hour, and it also has the firepower to actually kind of refuse opponents the ability to just YOLO you, since that 720 alpha can be very nice, especially when you're playing against lower tier opponents. But of course, this is not a lower tier opponent game, because there are tier 9s on the enemy team and no tier 7. So everyone he will be facing will, of course, be a lower tier. And you can see here the Conqueror and Carnarvon, the two British heavies, have made their way into a very, very annoying position. Of course, they have very nice turrets, and they're going to be difficult to dig out by pretty much anyone in the game, let alone the Progetto, because the Progetto, albeit has very, very good gun statistics, so you can hit weak points, hitting the Conqueror's weak point is not very nice, so it can be a little bit difficult to be able to deal with. But since Weekend Dak has the ability to know when to actually push and where the map advantageous positions are, where people have to expose themselves, then he's not really in a negative position, and he tracks the Conqueror up in the air, which is almost the perfect scenario for him and his team, where he takes the Conqueror out. Probably the most dangerous tank on this flank, to be honest with you, at least that of which he's spotted so far. Now, with the Conqueror out of the game, it's now time to get the Carnarvon, and of course there are usually people camping back in the bushes over there. And talking about people camping back in the bushes, the G-Sword does manage to get spotted, albeit here. You see a tree fell down actually over there. Don't know whether Dak here noticed that, but there's probably another tank over there if the G-Saw is not alone. So it puts one round into the G-Saw, which is nice, pokes a little bit, puts another one in, and now it's time to fully reload. Of course, you see him not utilising all of the shots all of the time, and that is exactly how the Progetto can be played. You don't have to fire all three, and often, a lot of the times, sometimes the third shot is the shot at which you get hit in return. So it may not be worth you pumping out the extra 240 if it means taking a 400 damage hit. So you have to trade it up, and that is exactly what Dak does within this game. Now, knowing that he's pushed his luck on the right hand side, he's now going to make a bit more of an aggressive play, because if he can get into this position, if he can be secure from the left hand side, which is of course from the D7 area, if he can get into this like kind of dip or bowl or the U-shaped area here, then he's going to be able to spot anyone that may be camping right at the back. And talking about the campers, he spots the 263, places a perfect round into the side there of the object 263, waits to fully reload, places another one. This is the Progetto at its finest, and now he places another round into him, and this is where it almost seems just unfair to play the Progetto, because you can reload using the full advantage position of the Progetto when you are reloading in single shot mode. He set the object 263 on fire, places another one, sets him out of his misery, and yeah, what a great result in general for the Progetto to find a tank like the 263, the non-turreted tank, out in the open, catching them off guard and just placing some rounds into them. And now he spots the Bourrasque, a tank that can be very dangerous, to be honest with you, because of course the Bourrasque is very, very stealthy. It can be a tank that can often lead to your demise just purely because it can spot you, but it can also deal damage. And another tank talking about dealing damage is the Object 704. You don't want to be caught out at all by that tank, since it will remove just over half of your hit points in the Progetto. So yeah, a tank that you need to get rid of as quickly as possible. And knowing now that his team have basically failed on the left hand side of the map, he will be the frontal force on this side, so there's no point in pushing this side of the map, since if he does so, he can get caught out by the opponents, who will then spot him, and then basically he'll be the focal point of all their fire, and then there's no escape. So he does decide to escape at this point. Continuing his retreat, he makes his way towards the bulk of his forces to be able to secure and defend, because ultimately if your team are getting taken out, or your team are going to lose all of their hit points, you might as well take advantage of that, and you might as well try and stop the enemy team from taking just as many of those hit points. It's looking very one-sided here. 9,300 hit points for the enemy team, 6,300. The enemy team are basically 1.5 times the hit points currently, but that could all change within a few clips of the Progetto, and of course a few hits by the tank destroyers on his team. But in this sort of scenario, he is thinking about damage limitation. Could he potentially win the game? Yes, he could, but he needs to be sure that he is going to put himself in the right sort of position, and this is a position that will benefit him quite a bit, and you're going to see that within this result. And he picks up the Brask, which is quite possibly a very, very nice result to do. It's probably one of the best things you can do. And he spots the E75, tries to place around, but unfortunately doesn't manage to, albeit that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. Now, obviously knowing that there are 2 tanks remaining on the enemy team pushing over from the other side, then he has to deal with them, because otherwise it's going to be a sausage sandwich, and no one likes a sausage sandwich on World of Tanks, since you don't want to be getting pumped in the mouth and pumped in the backside at the same time. At least I wouldn't. But anyway, the Progetto is now in a position which he can spot for his team. The Object 257 is definitely going to have spotted him here, which is not the nicest tank to come up against, especially when you don't have the firepower to actually take him out all in one go. Otherwise, you could just rush the 257, get him out of the game, and then progress on with this flank. Now, you'll notice that in this scenario, he's just trying to spot and make sure that he keeps him spotted. The SU-130 gets spotted there. The Object 257 is now going to be advancing. You know that the SU is a dangerous threat, so he wants to get rid of him since he's spotted, but the 257 is just continuing his advancement. He is not going to stop. And that is really the annoying bit about that tank, is that you can be in a scenario where you just feel like you can't do anything, especially when he shows you the side. It's one of those kind of idiot-proof tanks, to be honest with you, the 257, whereby someone can just YOLO you, and because they're side on, you pretty much can only track them. And yeah, it just doesn't lend itself very nicely to be able to just easily carry against. And talking about easily carry, there's nothing better than an Object 704 side on, and unfortunately he does get spotted, but it's not necessarily the worst thing. He's got the Emil in support who can help him against the 257, albeit the 257 is just being a nuisance. There's still the SU-130 PM that he needs to be very careful about. Places one round into him, takes him out. Fantastic. Great result there. Now, what does he do about the Scorpion G? Does he YOLO him? Does he decide to go full guns blazing into him? No, not currently, but he is trying to get the Object 704 out of the game, since that's a tank that you definitely don't want pumping you in the backside. And now we have the G-Saw that we spotted at the beginning of the game, who's obviously taking a long-winded approach around. And now it's time to actually go after the 257, because he needs to go. He needs to get out of the game. It's an annoying tank regardless. And now he proceeds with the longest time that you can ever hope for in World of Tanks, is just waiting and waiting and waiting for that time to arise where you are fully reloaded. And of course, the longer you wait, the better it's going to be, but it's just whether or not you can wait that long. And unfortunately for the Emil too, looks like the Scorpion G is just going to go full blast into him, which is probably the right thing to do by the Scorpion, but unfortunately for the Scorpion, it was his last dying flick of the little pincer. But yeah, now he's in a bit of a sticky scenario. There's a Scorpion G which can definitely help him out, and if he can keep the Scorpion alive, it could potentially be a win. But yes, there is of course still the Object 705 which can be dangerous, and we'd still have the T95 on the enemy team which can be ultimately just as dangerous as well. Now unfortunately the Scorpion G gets removed very, very easily, and it's not a scenario you want to ever be in World of Tanks, where you're feeling like there's not much you can do. The E75 does go side on for just a moment, and he places all 3 rounds into him. Now, having taken out the E75, he decides to take a retreating action, which is exactly what I would have done. Take your fight to your terms, because in World of Tanks, there are often moments where you could sit there and you could wait for the opponents to plot what they're going to do. But it's the best players in World of Tanks that decide to battle on their own terms, where their tank is at the advantage, and that is exactly what Dak is doing in this game, and that is where I think separates out the great from the good. And that is something that a lot of players forget, is that yes, you could be a super aggressive player, yes, you could YOLO people, yes, you could do all kinds of extra things that you feel like are going to benefit you, but they may not always. And you can see here Dak puts in a nice round into the UDES. Now, ramming him was probably not the best idea I've ever seen, since he's taking some damage for that, and it reduces the chances of maybe him being able to take a T95 hit, which I guess is not the... It's kind of one of those things where you should hope that you don't have to use your hit points as kind of a barrier, but in the event that you do end up coming up against the T95 and he does low roll, you're kind of limiting yourself to the chances of being able to do that. He didn't necessarily have to take out the UDES by ramming him there. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from that. But we cannot even question the capabilities of Dak here anyway, because he's managed to pick up 2,900 total damage. He's had 1,092 assistance, which will remain that way since he's the only tank remaining in this game. There's a T-95 and a G-Saw on the enemy team still alive, and these tanks are probably not the nicest to come up against. The T-95 will one-shot him out of the game. The G-Saw could potentially outspot him. So there's two scenarios that are going to happen. You're either going to get one shot by the T-95 or you're going to get clipped out by the G-Saw. That's the two failure mechanisms of the Progetto here. And hopefully that doesn't happen. But it's very much a kind of waiting game at this point. Oh no, it seems like he's caught the T-95 in the worst case scenario, and unfortunately he does get taken out. An absolute heartbreak. The fact that the T-95 was so close and he didn't manage to spot him, bit unfortunate, but at the end of the day you cannot really ask much more from one singular tank in a game other than 8,114 damage in a tier 8 in a tier 9 game, 1,092 assistance, and I'm sure that Dak here was upset with not getting the win, but probably not upset with the damage result he managed to pick up in this tank. And of course, hopefully you enjoyed this result. We'll check out the post-battle results right now. Now, Micah's amazing gameplay in replay number 1 was fantastic, and of course there's no surprise that he managed to pick up 282,000 silver, 9,388 experience, 25 bonds, and he came top of the team. Absolutely no surprise there. Probably dealing more damage than the whole team combined in one, and getting 12 kills, securing the Pools medal, the high caliber, the Top Gun, and probably countless other medals as well. So yeah, a really amazing result. Of course, he still made 201,000 silver, which was really good. Spent 69,000 on ammunition, so it wasn't complete just premium everywhere, and even if it was, like, it's not that bad. Securing just 3,000 for consumables, so yeah, a fantastic result in general for Micah. And then jumping into Dax here, unfortunately did the major defeat, which he just felt so unfortunate in the game, and he picks up the mastery badge even though it was a defeat, having picked up the highest amount of damage I've seen in the Progetto, at least during this patch, with 8,386 damage done, 7 of the opponents taken out, 1,573 XP on the loss. Remember, this is on a loss, and he picked up 220,000 silver after all of the consumables and ammunition were taken away, having picked up 428,793 on completion of the game due to both personal missions, battle payments, personal reserves, and of course the standard and achievements as well. So what a result. Even though you got the loss, even though you felt like you could have grasped the win, it was still so good. And I'm so glad that you uploaded it to the What Replay site. Now, if you're interested in watching any more replays similar to this, then of course we've got loads on the channel, and hopefully you enjoyed, and make sure to subscribe if you aren't already. Check out the left hand side, which shows a Cranvon replay that you'd really hope you managed to get, and on the right hand side, Concept 1B. Hopefully I'll see you there. Goodbye.